Today I want to talk about how to survive levels 25 to 50 on the insane difficulty in Tales of Maj'Eyal. This is a follow-up to the 0 to 25 level survival guide, which is linked in the description and I recommend watching first. Let's talk about the defenses, since that really is the most important part to understand to survive. Inscriptions and immunities are crucial, but I talked about them enough in the last video. I also mentioned that early on, you should be prioritizing max HP on gear to be able to survive. But this only works for so long. As enemies continue getting stronger, you'll need to add another, absolutely key component to your survivability: resistances. Once things start hitting for 1000 damage, you don't want to be relying on your plus 40 max HP lantern. Resistances work like in every other game. They simply reduce the damage by a percentage. Every character will need resistances, so around the first prodigy is when I usually try to max thick skin, which gives you all resistance. This requires quite a lot of constitution, which you are unlikely to be putting points into this early, so you'll need to save up gear that increases it, and how quickly that drops is just reliant on luck, so just put points into it whenever you can. In this window, all resist is already applied to your resistances, so you don't need to do any math. If it says you have 25% light resist, you have 25% light resist. Also, it can be confusing because resistances only show up at a certain threshold, so if you have, let's say, 5% cold resistance, it might not even show up here. Without a doubt, the most important resistance is physical, simply because it's the most common damage type. A lot of the classes in the game use weapons to attack, which usually deal physical. Even if you stack armor and armor hardiness, don't think you can ignore it, as some enemies can have a lot of armor penetration, or some classes can deal physical damage through spells. As for how much of a resistance is enough, I'd say at this point at least 30% should let you feel safe, and eventually at least 40% by the end game. Max HP is still a helpful stat, but unless it's a high amount, which would be at least 100, you should be ready to swap it out for resistances, immunities, or damage and resistance penetration, which also becomes more and more important the further you get into the game. Killing your enemies before they can fight back is absolutely the best form of defense, so if you find a good offensive item, definitely don't be afraid to use it. The starting point of this video is the main tier 2 dungeons. Maze, Sandworm Lair, Daikara and Old Forest are all cleared. If you go up to the northern part of the map, you'll encounter the unknown tunnels. It's very important to learn to differentiate between the Dark Crypt and this zone, because both only pop up once, like this, and they both mention hearing screams, but you definitely don't want to go to the Dark Crypt, while you definitely do want to visit the Assassin Lord. If you have the Forbidden Colts DLC, you always want to walk straight to the boss, talk to him and join him, as this gives you access to the Font of Sacrifice, which lets you reroll the modifiers on your items once you come back from the east, which is very overpowered. If you don't have the DLC, you want to kill the Assassin Lord while trying to keep the merchant alive, so you can later buy powerful items from him in Last Hope. You also want to clear the very old Halfling ruins. The first level always looks like this, with big open space between small rooms, and it's possible to die here if you get teleported or pulled by an enemy, and then there are 5 other rares. It can go wrong quickly, so I recommend clearing some of the small rooms as you go, so you have some space to kite and hide. On the 4th level, at the bottom, you'll find Subject Z trying to murder the Yikveist. If you can save him, you permanently get plus 15 mental save and 10% confusion immunity, which is not a lot, but a permanent buff is a permanent buff. Unfortunately, killing Subject Z before he kills the Yik is pretty difficult. The best way to do it is to teleport or pull him out of the room, which most characters won't be able to do, so you just have to try and burst him down, but I only managed to save the Yik on maybe like 30% of my characters, so don't feel too bad if you fail. A hidden compound is an easy zone to clear for some extra XP and items if you want. The only possible danger here is if you underestimate the slaves, because they can deal a decent amount of damage if you just stand still next to them. And now we enter the tier 3 dungeons, also known as powering up for Dreadfell. I like always starting with Tempest Peak. You need two things to fight Orcs. First, lightning resistance. A good way to test, if you're ready, is to see how much damage you take clearing out the lightning elementals in Derf. If this is even a little bit dangerous, you need to up your lightning resistance. The second requirement to fight Orcs is having a 100% stun immunity, otherwise you will spend the entire fight being constantly dazed, which will make it extremely difficult. With these two things in check, Orcs should be very manageable. He's not immune to anything but blind, so you can disable him and then kill him pretty quickly. The one important general tip that will help you against any tough enemy in the game is that you want to know about them before they aggro on you. This is where Trek comes in. A lot of classes will have access to it through their trees, but you can also get it from a thief escort, or it can be found on some items. You ideally want to isolate the dangerous target before you fight it, just so you don't get ambushed and so that you can safely run away if it doesn't go well. If you get surprised or you lose sight of the target and you don't know whether there is another unique waiting around the corner, it is often a good idea to just leave the zone and come right back. This will reset the aggro of all enemies on the level, so you can go back to step 1, trying to locate the target through Trek before it knows you're there. Once Orcs is dead, you get a very important reward from Golem, the Rune of Dissipation. Losing their sustains is a mage's worst nightmare, so this rune is extremely useful for neutralizing some enemies, but most importantly, the final boss. So you can take it as the 5th inscription, or I often try to get away with it as the 4th inscription. I run it instead of healing if I have some other stabilization built in, or mental wild if I have, let's say, mental shielding as a talent. If you are anti-magic, you just get a talent that removes magical sustains instead, so you don't need to even sacrifice an inscription. Next, I like diving into the Temporal Rift in Daikara. The only annoyance here is the first zone, but all you need to do is follow this one simple rule. Don't ever move while you see an enemy. Just wait for them to make their way to you. The enemies in this zone can teleport and your movement is 3 times as slow, so if you make a simple mistake and hold the button to move right for 1 extra turn, it will give the enemy 3 turns to murder you. If you are melee, wait around corners and you can still use your dashes as normal, or use a movement infusion to reposition, which, if it's a decent one, you'll still be moving faster than the regular turn. I recommend hugging the top or bottom side of the zone and very slowly making your way to the right, where you'll find a portal to get out. After going through 2 more zones, you'll get to the boss. If you want to be safe, play around this S-shaped cover at the start. You can pull the boss with an ability, or peek at them and run back, and then simply wait for one of them to come into your vision. On most characters though, you can probably just run in and kill them. They shouldn't be too dangerous. Third, I usually do the Lake of Nur, and I hope you've saved up a decent water breathing item for this one, otherwise you won't be able to auto-explore since you'll be constantly drowning. There are more than enough bubbles for you to clear this zone without water breathing, but it's just annoying. The boss here is the Weirdling Beast, which is one of the big reasons why I sometimes take Rune of Dissipation early, as that makes this fight very easy. Otherwise, Bone Shield is just an annoying sustain to get through, and it gives the beast time to put annoying debuffs on you. The arena is small, so there isn't much strategy here. Either you can kill it or not. You can always leave the zone if it's not looking good and simply come back later. After this, I go for Mark of the Spellblaze. Before you enter, check your blight resistance, since that's the type of damage the dangerous enemies in this zone deal, and it's a resistance that's easy to ignore since it's not too common, but this can be a lethal mistake to make. Make use of the trees for cover. Trying to fight the blood mages out in the open is not the best idea, especially for melee characters. At the end of floor 2 you'll find the Grand Corruptor. Be careful while clearing the mobs around him, since the mages can swap places with you, which could aggro him too early. If that happens, don't forget you can simply run away and reset the aggro. Rune of Dissipation is yet again very helpful here. If you know some spells, After you bring the Grand Corruptor below 40% life, he will give you the "we're not so different, you and I" speech and try to convince you to join him in destroying Ziggurar. If you think you are in danger of dying, you should definitely take his offer, which will instantly teleport you to combat, but from my experience, he can almost wipe out Ziggurar by himself while you run away for a bit and heal before helping him with the anti-magic leader. Or you can just kill him. Then there's Golem Graveyard, which you can clear for a bit of easy experience, and the Ruined Dungeon, which I used to always clear until I died in it once, and since then I just skip it. As for the Last Hope Graveyard, I like killing Celia as revenge for all the characters that I lost to her, but if your character is not particularly strong, you might want to skip her, because you can't run away once the fight begins, the stairs disappear. First, you always have to clear the graves, since those automatically open when the boss fight starts, which is a really evil mechanic, since you are extremely likely to die to this the first time you get here. Then you Rune of Dissipation her, if you can, and burst her down before you get overwhelmed by the summons. If the fight is not going well, there is not much you can do. You can run back, but the skeletons will chase you down quickly. And now it's time for Dreadfell, which is where the endgame grind begins, with floors after floors after floors of enemies. There are 9 of them in Dreadfell, and on the last one, there's the Master waiting for you. He's another great target for the Rune of Dissipation, so you can probably see by now why it's tempting to fit it in as the 4th inscription. He's a bit harder to quickly burst down than Celia, so try to not fight him in the open. If you stay in a tunnel, only 2 of his skeletons can surround you, and that's important because unlike ghouls, skeletons really hurt, so you shouldn't underestimate them. Of course, the Master has a trick up his sleeve. He will revive once when you kill him. A lot of times at that point, you've basically already won the fight, so you just kill him again. But if you are struggling, you can just leave the floor and heal up. He won't get the revive back, I'm like 90% sure. The reward for beating the Master is getting ambushed immediately. But this shouldn't be too big of a problem, it's just a lot of physical damage, which you should be well prepared for anyways. After catching up with the King in Last Hope, it's time for a decently big difficulty spike. Not like tier 1s to tier 2s, but Reknor is definitely a danger zone. It is very long corridors, sometimes intersecting with one another, where enemies can be clumped together and you can pull many of them at once. Track comes in extremely handy in this zone, so that you can pull them one by one. If you can help it, do not auto-explore here. Once you get through the early floors, the orc boss at the end should not be a problem. The biggest danger in the east, by far, are the orc patrols. If you get caught, you are extremely likely to die. This is very, very painful to have happen at this point. Trust me, I know from experience. You can move twice in the time the patrols move once, so you can safely approach them in theory, but just be patient. Don't take any risks, especially around corners. You should try to leave some space, so if they are around the corner, you don't just immediately run into them. If an orc patrol is simply blocking the way, go move up and down 50 times near the capital, and they'll hopefully be gone when you come back. On the 2nd floor of War Armoury, you'll find the Rune of Death Vault, which I've cleared exactly once on Insane Roguelike on a skirmisher for the achievement, and I refuse to ever do it again because it's definitely not worth the risk. Spoiler alert, if you don't want to know what's inside, you can skip to the next chapter. If you do want to do it, it's doable, but you absolutely need to try and fight the dragons one by one. There are 7 of them, they are extremely high level, so their talents are like level 50, so do not set your foot in until 6 of them are dead. They are in the corners of the room, and if you let them all breath you at the same time, you are definitely going to die, so good luck. Once you bring back the quest item, you'll get Briagh's Lair on your map, and you'll need to dodge some more patrols to get there. The zone itself though is very easy, you can just stand still and the boss will come to you. Now you can go back through the portal and finalize your character. You'll get access to the Font of Sacrifice, where you can make your items extremely overpowered. I highly recommend looking up the list of item modifiers on the wiki, so that you know what you can get. And you get to kill the 9 guardians scattered throughout the earlier zones, which all give a lot of XP and they shouldn't be too dangerous. The most important of these is the Corrupted Sandworm, which will give you your last and final category point. You can keep track of where all these guardians are in the recommended zone order progression on the wiki. When they are all dead, you'll be pretty close to level 50. Then you need to do the Tenant quest, which I don't have much to say about. I always keep the orb, just because that's what I'm used to doing, but it doesn't matter much, it just gives you a different dungeon to do. Now that you're back to the east, it's time for the Orc Prides. Here often the most dangerous part is entering floor 1, because you can't pre-buff. The mages in Orc Pride can randomly teleport you, so make sure to save your movement inscription. Grushnak Pride, the fighter one, is usually pretty easy until enemies start deleting walls and you pull 6 of the rooms at once. Then it can become a problem. There's not much you can do to play around these situations, just try and be ready for them. Other than that, it's just a grind to get through. No more surprises, just a lot of enemies. Don't forget to clean Erúan, as it gives you rich stingers, which are an alchemist ingredient you still likely don't have at this point, and also completing it will make the paladin help you tank the final boss. With a movement inscription, the timed sequence where you just run south isn't a problem. Just don't try to teleport in this zone. And now it's time for the final push. Make sure to go back west, drink all the alchemist elixirs, spend all your gold on the Font of Sacrifice, say goodbye to your tentacled friend. This is it. You don't want any regrets. Even if your character feels really overpowered at this point and you are just mashing buttons, High Peak is a bit of a different beast and you need to maintain your focus for these next 10 grueling floors. Track is really crucial here, as you don't want to full clear these zones. Even though I've done it in the past, it's needless risk, as with track you can often quickly locate the Star Guardian and move on. You do not need to kill the Guardian to move to the next floor, so if it's a particularly nasty combination of classes, you can try to slip by. Also, if you have, let's say, a 100% stun immunity and you still get stunned, that's because each of these floors have a modifier tied to it, which you can hover over on the right side of the screen, and sometimes it reduces immunities. On the 10th floor, you'll find the teleport to the final boss, Elandar and Argoniel. The first decision you should make is whether or not you are closing the 4 portals, one in each corner of the arena. These will slowly spawn enemies as the fight goes on, but I think the vast majority of characters should have enough damage to completely ignore these portals and just focus on the boss. If you want to see an example of a character that did need to close the portals, you can look at my Paradox Mage video. You close them simply by standing on top of the portal and using the stones you got from killing the Orc Pride leaders. The second decision is, are you going to kill Elandar or Argoniel first? Generally, it's better to kill Elandar, he deals the most damage and he also dies fairly quickly if you can strip his sustains. Argoniel has one talent that can completely ruin your character by itself, and that's the Burning Hex. It applies in a radius 2 around its target, so move to the left at the start so it doesn't hit you if it gets targeted on the paladin. You can also utilize these pillars to break vision and heal if need be. And that's kind of it for the strategy. Mostly it's reliant on the power of your character. Ideally, you will kill Elandar before the paladin dies to Argoniel. If the paladin dies and Elandar still has like 50% HP, I'm sorry to say, you are in big trouble. But hopefully, you've now just beaten the game on insane difficulty. Congratulations. It's funny how a game like this can become really intense and even give you an adrenaline rush, when there's all this pressure and all those hours and close calls on the character culminating in this one final challenge. And despite how overly long the late game of Tome is, beating the final boss always gives a great feeling of accomplishment. So, hopefully, this video can help you get there. Thank you for watching.